Welcome to Devalued with Mike and Caroline, the place where we talk about art and money and how creative people are navigating the ever-changing landscape of trying to make a living for their work.
We're going to be interviewing all types of creative people, and we'll be talking about all types of issues that creative people face. We hope you'll get something out of it. We're excited to welcome you to Devalued.
Hey, Caroline.
Hey, Mike. Who are we talking to today?
We are talking to Colin MacIntyre, who is the man behind Mull Historical Society, a iconic Scottish indie pop group.
And he also is a novelist.
He's a novelist, a man of words, and his new album, In My Mind There's a Room, also includes the words of many other famous novelists.
I really enjoyed this conversation. We talk about community, we talk about the music industry, and he has a great real-life example of someone in his life embodying both artistic pursuits and a mind for money.
That's true. And he also has a great sense of how to stay original and true to yourself. And I thought this was a really inspiring conversation.
Me too.
Cool. Check it out.
We always start by asking, do you think art and money go together?
Yes. Yeah, I think so, yeah. I mean, I remember when I first, my music was starting to get noticed, or it was looking like, there might be a record deal or, kind of more about infrastructure around what I do. And I was always quite aware it was the music business. And actually, even before that, when I was, calling record companies and keeping very organized files of who had spoken to, and well, I'm not that organized, but I was quite focused in trying to get my music going. And even then, I was always aware that it was the music business. So I think for me, I do think, the arts kind of goes together with money, but I suppose I don't really feel that that's not my drive. I think my drive is ideas and originality, what makes you original. And hopefully from that comes, community exposure, connection, and some impact on your bank balance, I suppose.
There's something really interesting about your songs, too, because a lot of them do deal with, I guess, the economic pressure on people. I'm thinking about like songs like The Supermarket Strikes Back or Live Like the Automatics, songs that deal with like this kind of accelerationist impulse in society that kind of leaves people feeling alienated. And I wonder if you're aware of that kind of theme in your writing.
Well, now you point it out. Yeah, I think, yeah. I mean, I suppose, yes. I think I come from, in case folks don't know, I come from the Isle of Mull and the Hebrides. So that's a kind of a group of islands on the west coast of Scotland in the Atlantic. So, so for me, it's about 2,500 people on the island. And so community, second time I've mentioned the word community, so it must mean something to me. But yeah, coming from a small community with many more sheep than human beings on the island, I've always, for me, writing about where I come from, whether it be in music or I also write books as well, it does have a factor on, I think where you come from is a really important part of being an artist. And it took me a little while to figure that out. I was in Glasgow and working in jobs. I was a student in Glasgow. But really, for me, everything I was doing was really a device or a way, a vehicle to be creative. Instead of, well, I was doing my uni work, but I was also writing essays about what I was studying. I was writing songs about what I was studying. And so for me, community and how it impacts on you, how it travels with you is really important. So when you come from a small place, I'm wondering if that matters to you even more. And so back to your question and how people are affected by issues, and whether they be economic, or other ways, in terms of remoteness or how geography affects people. I think that just matters to me, but it took me a while to kind of get there. I think a lot of my songwriting, like a lot of people, is probably quite influenced by other artists at first, and then gradually you find your own voice, your own sound. And again, it's back to what makes you original. I think it's back to what you feel you can authentically talk about. And for me, coming from a small place, definitely I was always interested in how bigness affects smallness, and how smallness affects bigness. And my first single, you mentioned The Supermarket Strikes Back, was a song on my second album, and it was a response actually to my first ever single, which is called Barcode Bypass. And it was about a small shopkeeper trying to tell his wife that he was going to stop taking the heart medication. He was just going to walk off with his dogs. So I kind of distilled that to barcode, meaning commerce, bypass his medical condition. And I took verse 2 lyrics off the pack of a painkiller medication pack. So that story very much came from the community I come from. And even when the sort of, media or music press started to get interested in what I was doing, I remember taking Time Out London up to the Isle of Mull. And the journalist was standing at the end of the old pier and was looking, because, God, there's the corner shop and there's the supermarket. And this song was really about a supermarket affecting this kind of small town shop owner, and that impact that was having on his business. And I was really pleased the journalist kind of picked up on that. There isn't a supermarket where I come from. I mean, I don't know what he was really saying. We had quite a big night the night before, so maybe he was visualizing one. But the small shop where I come from does feel a bit like a supermarket to us. And so yeah, the song you referenced, The Supermarket Strikes Back, was basically the supermarket owner responding to the small shopkeeper for putting him out of business. And interestingly, when that first single came out, Barcode Bypass, there was a problem with the barcode on the CDs, as it was mostly then. So it actually it became a reality, really, that the singles weren't getting tagged properly for some reason. There's some error with the barcode. So it literally became the case. But yeah, I suppose it wasn't your normal first single.
The record label strikes back.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, the public. And yeah, I haven't written one from the perspective of the record label owner yet, I don't think. But it was 7.5 minutes long, and I suppose it wasn't Boy Meets Girl song, or boy meets anybody, or girl meets anybody. But it was, I remember being on that seafront that I talked about, that I grew up on, and hearing it getting played on BBC Radio 1 at about 3:00 in the afternoon, thinking, wow, and they played all 7.5 minutes of it. So I remember thinking, all right, something's going to change now. But maybe not in time to save that shopkeeper. But I think what you say there, Mike, is quite on the money, if I could say that. I think probably it does matter to me, social conditions and how they affect people.
We love that. We think about that often, and I'm from a small town too, maybe not that small. But right. I find that community is really the whole reason I was drawn to music in the first place.
Yeah, my first album was called Loss, and it actually only recently, because it reached a certain birthday, 21st anniversary, and it's recently been reissued, and I've done quite a lot of shows here in the UK playing the album in its entirety and whatnot. But only recently I realised that it only ever had one alternative title, which was Community, and I'd actually forgotten that. So, but Lost became more of a theme. But yeah, hopefully it's quite an uplifting album as well. It's not necessarily all about the downside of grief, but there is a lot of just writing about characters and real people, and that for me, whether it be in TV or film or books or plays, that's always really influenced me as much as anything else, you know, in my music. Those trying to sort of bring characters to life, to try and highlight the way we live.
In a way, that album is the reason why we're talking, because when I was in high school, me and my friend Lloyd were walking through a record store, and we were really stoned out of our minds. He came across the album Lost with the dog with the wig on it, and he was like, "What the fuck is this?" And we bought it. We had no idea who you were, and we listened to it in the car on the way home, and it was so amazing. And so ever since then, I've been a huge fan. So shout out to Lloyd.
Yeah, thank you, Lloyd. I really appreciate both your appreciation of dog and headwear. Yeah, you must have thought Mull Historical Society, front cover, dog in a wig. Yeah, it must have taken a wee bit of explaining or listening.
For sure.
I remember one time being in a bar in New York, and there was quite nice music getting played and chatting to the barman, and this doesn't happen to me very often. It doesn't really happen to me back in Isle of Mull that often. But anyway, I was chatting to him, and I mentioned we were talking music, and he asked what I did, and I got talking, and I told him what I did, and he when he actually knew my album, my first album, and he said, "Oh, the dog in the wig," and I was like, "Yeah." So it's I'll take the visual recognition as much as the audio.
Some musicians I find shy away from that. I do graphic design a little bit too, and so I work with a lot of musicians to help them, come up with whether it's posters or single art or cover art or whatever it may be. And a lot of artists shy away from that. They're like, "Oh, I don't do that. I don't do visual stuff." But I'm like, it's another way to express yourself. It's another way to try to connect with people and catch some attention.
I think, I suppose it goes back a little bit to what you said at the beginning. I felt because I've always been, despite the kind of pseudonym name, I've always been solo. I've always been really on my own in terms of the writing, the creativity. I'll maybe tour with bigger bands, and well, maybe we'll get onto it, but I'm collaborating a lot more now. I'm becoming less of a control freak. But the point I was going to make is back to that thing of music business. I remember feeling that, for better or worse, when I kind of signed first deal and on a tour bus, and I realized I was almost the head of a small business. Now, my management then were, very experienced, and I also took a lot of advice from people around me. But, I'd been trying for a while to get things going. So I suppose I saw my role in everything I did, whether that be the kind of business side of it going on around me, as much as I could, try and learn quickly about a lot of those things, but also the creativity thing, as you said, Caroline, I wanted to be a part of everything, so I remember people at the beginning asking me, because I produced my first 3 albums as well, and I suppose I played quite a lot of stuff on it and wrote the songs, and then I was interested in the visual, and people would say, why do you do all these things? And I don't mean this to blow my own trumpet, because lots of people do it, but I just felt like, well, because I can, and because I want to, and you always learn. I look back at some things visually and think, actually my 3rd album, This Is Hope, which was recorded in America and written somewhat in New Orleans and traveling around a bit, but the original cover, completely my fault. I just didn't really like, and I didn't really like over the years. But, and this is not a commerce plug on your money show, but it's recently been reissued as well as my first two albums on vinyl, and it didn't come out on vinyl, This Is Hope, for some reason at the time. So it was really nice to have another go actually at the artwork and sort of simplify it and reflect maybe more accurately this album that had been sort of made in the UK, but also in America, and that space in between the Atlantic, all those things kind of featured. And so yeah, it's quite nice when you get another crack at it as well. But I agree. I think it's nice to be a part of. I mean, I think quite visually in my songwriting, I think. So I suppose maybe that's just the way I am.
And the cool thing about that too is that, when I guess your first three records were coming out, the vinyl resurgence hadn't quite yet happened. And so I guess now, what is it like to have all of your albums reissued on vinyl? I would imagine that would probably be the way that you first heard your favorite records would be on vinyl, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was never really a massive music collector. That's something that is sort of happening more now, really. I'm much more interested in vinyl, and my wife's got an amazing sort of vinyl collection, and I think I'll never catch up with hers. But again, maybe it goes back to where I came from. I didn't grow up. I grew up on an island. There was no record shop, no cinema, there was one shop, not the corner shop I mentioned earlier, but where you could buy a bar of soap, get some plumbing equipment, and maybe a record if you were lucky, in the corner somewhere. So I think maybe it's just you're a product again of where you come from. So, but yeah, it's been really nice to have more of an appreciation of vinyl now, and being able to enjoy that. And I love actually my first three records I won on the island in the local hall where I then started performing. But it was a local tombola kind of fair, and I won a record player and three records. And the record player was like a suitcase. I'm not that old. I think it predated me by about 20 years. I think I loved it from the seafront all the way up to my house, where I had still got it here. My 4-track I don't use it anymore, but my little 4-track recording set up, and I was trying to learn all this stuff, and it was Sound of Silence, Queen's Greatest Hits, and With the Beatles, and
it's pretty good.
And this record, yeah, and this old record player, so I used to kind of fall asleep at night listening to this, and then try to learn all the songs. So yeah, despite kind of that happening to me when I was a teenager, really, I haven't had a load of records in the intervening years as much as maybe I should have, given I'm a musician. But you do spend a lot of time in your own head making your own stuff as well,
For sure. You mentioned that you got some advice when you were kind of starting out. Is there anything you can share that you really remember kind of guiding your path?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I had a lot of good people around me, and yeah, I think that idea of, I remember maybe from an unlikely source, but maybe not, my first ever tour, and we got picked up in Glasgow, and I was supporting Elbow for a month. My second ever tour, I supported The Strokes for about 6 weeks. So I had quite a good few, early, even though I had a tour bus and The Strokes had a blue transit van, but within about 3 nights, they had a tour bus as well. But maybe we'll come to it. But we were on the same label, Rough Trade in the UK. But I remember on that first tour going off and thinking, all right, this is real. This is a tour bus. Somehow those 3 records I won and that 4-track in my bedroom is equating to this, to being on the road, to grown men around me who are my crew and a band. And, and I remember sitting up front, sort of just thought, well, I'll just sit up front and kind of get myself comfortable. And I had a little bit of a sort of somewhere on the border between, because it started in London or Brighton, the tour, so right down to the south coast of the UK from starting out in Glasgow, and sitting with a bus driver who was a Liverpudlian who'd driven many big artists, and And I thought, I'll just start with him. We just started looking at the road, going, chatting. And I remember him saying that thing to me. He called me boss. And I was like, okay. And then I sort of felt like, well, you're the boss, really. You know this more than me, And but I remember him saying to me, no, you are, what. I suppose it ties in a bit of what I've already said. He said, your music's the reason these wheels are on the road, and look after it. And I think he'd seen, he was probably 60 years old, and he'd seen all kinds of experiences, and good and bad, of musicians and artists. And so I think I remember him saying to really look after my music, and to look after where the money's been spent. And I had this whole conversation. We were halfway by Manchester and then Birmingham, and I was just sitting up front, and it always stuck with me, actually, but there was also management and lawyers and other people probably saying things like that to me. But I think the idea of just trying not to be wasteful, and obviously budgets over the years have changed, but to kind of always think, well, ultimately it's what you make creatively that matters, and to try and achieve it the way you hear it in your head, but to be aware that any money you're being given from another source usually has to be paid back. Other advice, I remember listening to again, I remember listening to an author in Glasgow called Alistair Gray, who some of your listeners may not know of, but Alistair Gray's probably written, one of the biggest books of the last sort of 50 years or more in Scotland anyway, and it's called Lanark. And he and Irvine Welsh, Trainspotting, are usually sort of one or two of the top books in those kind of polls. And I remember going to see Alistair Gray talk, and I actually name-checked Alistair Gray, and This Is Hope, now I think about it. And This Is the Hebrides, the song, and This Is Hope, the album, which is my third album. I referenced Alistair Gray and Philip Roth. I think I just kind of read out some of the names of a pile of books in front of me and somehow made them rhyme. But anyway, I remember going to see Alistair Gray talk, and somebody had asked him in the audience about writing, and I was really trying to learn the craft of writing then, like novel writing and short story writing, as you always are. And he said, somebody asked him for advice on a particular thing, and he said, well, I think they were thinking they were going to get some stylistic advice from him or something, to do with writing. And he said, well, get yourself a flat if you can. If you can afford that, maybe it's a job you have, but try if you can get yourself a property, and if you can have a second room, and if you can rent out that second room to someone else, then that's another income. And you may have other income coming from your creative pursuits, but that will ensure that you can continue doing what you're doing, and hopefully as much as possible on your own terms. And I always remember that really stuck with me. And I think there was a lot of people left that talk thinking, I wanted to hear about, he did talk about his writing as well, but that actually, I remember leaving thinking, oh yeah, that's good advice. He just gave very practical advice to new writers, So there's probably been lots of other advice I've been given over the years, but I think for me, it's just sort of being aware that I've never been signed as a band, and that's a kind of slightly different situation, So that presents positives and potential other difficulties, maybe in terms of finance or. But yeah, I think just to be aware that to try and build relationships, because it's always tempting to take big advances, whether it's for me as a novelist or as a musician, but maybe try and if you can take less of the advance, then I think they might see you as a bit more of a long-term prospect, and maybe try and negotiate better royalties than necessarily a significant advance. and try and get that spare room.
That is good advice. I think staying afloat financially is probably the biggest hardship that a lot of artists face right now.
Yeah, because it's a journey creatively, you know, and I think I feel fortunate. I've always tried to keep my ideas on the go, you know, and to keep, you know, I've had many different record deals and different ways of being financed. I've set up my own label that came from a kind of venture capitalist money at one point. So, you know, just to try and get as much stuff out there. But for me, I suppose it comes back to that thing of creatively, I never want to stay in one place. I'm, you know, the people that inspire me are people who take risks. And I always say this to, you know, maybe students or young people I might be working with. I always say these two things: what makes you original? And, you know, I think of creativity as almost being a bit on a cliff edge, and being willing to jump, being willing to be real, to reveal. And I also think, so I think that's important creatively, but I think for me, the artists that I also admire are ones that don't stand still and that try different things. You know, Bowie, David Byrne. There's so many, you know, but that I respect because they keep evolving. You know, PJ Harvey, and I think I'm particularly interested in trying other things. You know, like for me, writing comes from the same place as songwriting, and it's another potential income. You know, it's another potential way of getting your ideas out there and keeping what you want to do going.
It's really interesting that you, your new record, In My Mind There's a Room, is a collaboration with other writers, and you've been so focused on being a writer yourself. So how did you let the words go to other people? You outsourced the thing that you love to do.
Yeah, it's interesting that you word it that way. How did I let that happen? It's funny. I was thinking when I first discussed it with a few people, and I remember talking to Bernard Butler. Do you know Bernard Butler, who was
Suede.
the founder of Suede?
Yeah,
and lots of great things. McCallum and Butler, and he's done an album with Jessie Buckley, the artist, the actress. But Bernard produced my last album, Wake Lines, and that was great. You know, you learn from other people again, and also seeing how other people maintain their careers and diversify. And Bernard's, you know, produced a lot of people as well as being a songwriter. And anyway, I remember talking to him about it and him saying, well, I think a lot of people come to you for your words. I was like, okay. And I mean, that was nice of him to say. But maybe I've been using a lot of words in other places. You know, I have been writing a lot. I write kind of kids' books and fiction and non-fiction, and like us all through lockdown, you know, we had to kind of keep ourselves busy, and I found myself working on loads of different things that are now sort of hopefully coming to fruition. You know, they're kind of starting to find where they should land, and because creativity often feels like solving a puzzle, whether it's a novel or a song or whatever. And so the idea of reaching out was this thing of collaboration and realizing that it would be, I've always wanted to bring my kind of worlds of music and writing together. And I've had that idea for a while. And then the most unlikely thing happened last year, where my grandparents' flat, their apartment on Mull in Tobermory, which is the main sort of town on Mull that I come from, was turned into a recording studio. And they lived there for 45 years. My grandfather was the bank manager. So the flat is above the bank on Tobermory Main Street. If anyone wants to Google this, look at a kind of picturesque, colourful Tobermory seafront. The bank flat was quite an unusual building. It's got a turret window. I mean, to me, it was just where my grandparents lived when I grew up. But I suppose it's quite an unusual space. And I hadn't been in it in 20 odd years because my grandfather passed away in the late 80s. And then my grandmother left the flat in the sort of early 2000s. So I mean, what's the chances of being a musician in your grandparents' flat turning into a recording studio? And it's a good friend of mine, Gordon MacLean, who ran the Arts Centre on the island, which is actually my old primary school, and he ran that for 25 years, and he was looking for a studio to sort of work in, and he could have knocked me off the tube in London when I saw the email from him that he'd found this Seaview interesting building with a turret. It's like, what? I mean, it was just as bizarre. So, he said, come up and do a few tunes. You have to be the first to record in it. And my great-grandmother lived in the flat as well. And, you know, she remembered Queen Victoria, and she was about 20 when the Titanic went down. And so, you know, it was a lot of history there. She remembered Butch Cassidy and, you know, these sort of stories of the Wild West. And I stress, I'm not that old, you know. But, so it was, you know, there was a lot in those rooms for me, and I spent my childhood there. And what I haven't mentioned is my grandfather was the bank manager, but he was also the poet, and he's still in print now, and he's called Angus MacIntyre. So, you know, he was quite unusual for a bank manager. He was a complete, incredible one-off character, and we'd go off doing speaking tours. He chaired all the Cayleys. He, you know, their kind of Scottish dancing parties, and so this bank flat was not a usual bank, you know, building. It was, he wrote his poetry there. You were never quite sure whether he was doing poetry or banking, and living above the shop, you know, he was always there, and people would leave with an overdraft that they didn't even ask for, and maybe a poem stuffed in their pocket, and usually several whiskies inside them. And, you know, you had film stars like Anthony Hopkins and Robert Wagner, who had made films on Mull. Mull's been used quite a lot for things like that, who would come and visit this quite eccentric kind of poet bank manager, you know. So it was so it wasn't just any old room to me. And I spent a lot of, he's still my biggest sort of inspiration as a storyteller. So this combination of him being a poet, his old flat becoming a recording studio. So I thought, okay, you know, you have these little light bulb moments where you think this is the time to try that ambition of bringing those two worlds together. And I had an old song called In My Mind There's a Room, and that song should never be heard. But it was like early days of, you know, before I found my Mull Historical kind of identity. But, you know, I'd written hundreds of songs as a teenager and recorded them. And so it was one of those. But I liked the title, and it just kind of, I thought, oh, that fits. That's what that's for. So I reached out to a load of authors and asked them if they would give me maybe 30 lines, original words on a significant room to them, that I was then going to go and record in a significant room to me. And I had no idea. I wrote an email explaining this story I've just told you. And yeah, I got a load of responses from, you know, a range of authors, like Ian Rankin, who's one of the sort of big UK crime writers, Val McDermid, who's a crime writer, Jason Mott, who won the US National Book Award in 2021 for Hell of a Book. So he's a kind of New York Times bestseller. Sebastian Barry, who's won the Booker Prize, the big book prize in Britain. And Nick Hornby, who's a writer who did the Brooklyn film screenplay, but also did Fever Pitch and About a Boy, and of course the film set in the record shop, High Fidelity.
Yeah. Yep, great movie.
That's Nick's book.
Yep.
A lot of his books are made into film. So it's been wonderful. So suddenly I was in this bank flat back home recording, you know, these stories, taking me to North Carolina, Jason Mott, taking me to New York. One of the songs is called Red Flame Diner by an author, Stephen Kellman, who's an English author, but that diner, New York, is significant to him and his wife. So people just wrote about a room that was significant to them, and yeah, I've loved sort of taking their stories and just trying to form them into songs. And then really I was just curious how Elton John works with Bernie Taupin. You know, I thought, how does he do that? You sit, you know, you get somebody's word, you're sitting on the piano, and where do you go? And I'd never done that before. I've written hundreds of songs and I'd never done that. So it's felt really quite effortless, but it's been a real privilege to kind of have my hand on their door, so to speak, you know, and I'm really pleased with the album. It comes out in July, and yeah, it doesn't really feel at other people's stories. You know, that was the weird thing. Like my friend who took on the studio, who engineered and recorded the album, you know, he said that to me. It's almost like, it feels like, he goes, I'm really curious about where all these places are, the Red Flame Diner and the different titles that people have given us, you know. But he said, actually, they feel like they've somehow just kind of traveled through me and rooms. And so, yeah, I was singing in my grandparents' bedroom, where they used to be. And actually, the last time I walked into that space, because it's been rented out since then and I hadn't been in it, was when my third single off Lost came out, Animal Cannabis. Because I always remember we had a party as a family to leave the flat, and I just got my chart position for my third single, and it got to number 41. So, you know, the UK top 40 is the big thing. So just out, but the next one went in. But anyway, so I always remembered, it was quite significant to me when I was last in that room. So yeah, I hope people enjoy it. I mean, it's just been real fun to make, and it's actually been fun to produce it myself, to get my hands on the tools again and sort of make it sound the way I hear it.
Well, the community of the Mull Historical Society keeps growing, and now we're honorary members, I suppose. And then everybody who's listening.
You are. I mean, this doesn't work on your podcast, but I do have membership cards here for you.
Ah, that's so great.
So there are. I remember having about 1 million of these made at the very beginning, and I've still got them. You know, I'll probably never get enough members. But I really, you know, it's very nice to be chatting with you and to just to have your music appreciated and for your music, you know, to travel really.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Colin. This has been so awesome for us.
Thank you, guys. I feel like I've done all the talking, but maybe that was the point.
That's the point.
Really, really pleasure talking to you guys.
Yeah, same. Thank you so much.
Bye.
No worries.
Bye. Thanks for listening to Devalued. For more information about our podcast, please visit devalued.show.